Then I also had an affirmation when I was in treatment that I really liked. It was absolutely nothing and no one stands in my way of recovering. And I used to say that to myself all the time, especially when I was like doubting or feeling hopeless or you can't do this anymore, or something's frustrating me or I want to use or whatever. Besides calling people and using the steps and all of that, just that little affirmation really helped me a lot.
It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
On today's episode of the Share Podcast, Gloria Uridel, now 27 years clean and a Y12SR yoga instructor, takes us through her shocking battle against drug addiction, alcoholism, and bulimia. She started her using career early with alcohol and was a blackout drinker from the start. To increase her tolerance to alcohol, she was introduced to the same speed that truckers use in order to stay awake for long trips. As a result of the massive amounts of drugs and alcohol she was consuming at an early age, she starts developing severe paranoid delusions and begins contemplating suicide. She attempts suicide by gorging herself on food, and when that fails, turns bulimic. Ultimately, Gloria hits rock bottom when she gets married and her husband turns her on to crystal meth, and her life completely spirals out of control. It's in that moment that her coworkers perform an intervention, and Gloria is introduced to recovery. Today, Gloria is a pillar in her community and helps others battle this horrible disease by combining yoga with recovery. It's an amazing and uplifting journey of recovery. Join us now. And after this interview, if you enjoyed listening to the Share Podcast, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. This will ensure we get ranked well on these networks, and that means more people will easily find the Share Podcast. This is the best way to show your support and help us grow. And finally, if you would like to make a donation to the Share Podcast, you can do so using PayPal. The entire amount of your donation will go towards maintaining and growing the show. On the top right corner of the website, you'll see a donate button. Just click on it, and this will take you to the page where you can make your donation. Thanks again for helping the Share Podcast become a huge success. Now back to the show. Hi, Gloria. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Omar. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show today. How you feeling?
Thank you. I'm feeling great. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome.
Good.
I'm excited to get started.
Me too.
Let's do it. Gloria, let's dive right in. Tell us about how your life is today, your hobbies, what you do for a living. Take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery.
Yeah, well, I live a pretty full life. I usually start out my day with a little prayer and meditation, and I always ask God to keep me abstinent and sober for the day. It's been my prayer for many, many years, so I like to start out that way. And I usually do some kind of physical exercise in the morning, usually the gym or yoga practice or a combination of the two. And then I do video editing work for the school district here in Austin. I'm a freelancer, so I'll do that at work. I teach a few yoga classes every week. I have a kind of eclectic lifestyle as far as work. And meetings, I still keep up with meetings. Usually do the online thing just because of my time schedule, and the traffic situation here in Austin can be a little challenging to get to places. So that's kind of what I do. I like to eat healthy and try to help people as much as I can. I feel like I help people a lot through my yoga teaching. It's not really recovery work per se, but a lot of people are struggling with a lot of different things in their life. And I feel like the yoga is a big way or a huge way to help them deal with some of the challenges that they have in their life. And I've also recently started a Y12SR meeting here in Austin, which is Nikki Meyer's baby, that she trains people to lead these Y12SR meetings that combines yoga with 12-step recovery. So it's kind of half meeting and then half yoga class. So I'm excited about that.
Yes, well, that's how we met. I had already interviewed Nikki, and her share has inspired you to come on our show, which is great. Yeah. My wife is a yoga instructor, and it's made such a huge impact in her life. And she had some challenging situations that wasn't drug or alcohol related, but the yoga was the spiritual connection that she needed to get back on track and to clear a lot of the negative energy in her life.
Yeah. I mean, when I went through treatment, that was one of the things that they tried to teach us is that now you have to take out all the negative things in your life that you were doing and replace it with something positive. It's not that you just sit around and don't do anything. You got to recreate your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of which, how long have you been clean and sober, and what's your sobriety date?
So my sobriety date is November 19th of 1987, and I've been sober 27 years, 9 months, and 4 days.
Wow. That is so awesome. I love those numbers.
Yeah, it's great. I'm just so blessed to be living this life.
I guess that's the best way to give credit where credit is due. At the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, and it all started by recovery.
Very true.
All right. So tell us a little bit about the first time you drank or used drugs. How old were you? And more importantly, how did they make you feel?
Yeah, well, I remember my dad was a farmer, so we'd work out in the fields when I was a kid, and he would always have a beer at lunchtime. And which seems weird to me now, but at the time he would always let us have the very end of the bottle. So it wasn't like alcohol was prohibited in our family. But I guess when I was 13 is when I started drinking with my friends behind my parents' back and getting drunk and smoking cigarettes and experimenting with pot mostly back then, starting out. And then it just kind of progressed from there. But I felt like I was more at ease, and I felt like I was accepted in my group of friends, and it was the cool thing to do. And because I was a farm kid, and I grew up in a small town, but the farm kids were kind of looked down on, and I wasn't a city kid. And so it made me feel like I was accepted and I was cool. I don't know. That's the only thing I can say about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So it looks like you're all warmed up, so it's time for me to turn the show over to you, Gloria.
Okay.
It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally, your journey into recovery up until today. So, Gloria, take it away.
Okay, thanks. Well, like I said, I started when I was about 13. I was mostly drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. And when I was 15, my dad got diagnosed with liver cancer. And at the time, I was already drinking pretty much with my friends on the weekends. I grew up in a small town, so we'd all hop in a car and go buy some beer. We'd always see who could go to the little store and get away with buying a 6-pack or whatever. So that was our kind of like our little ritual. And then when he got diagnosed, I kind of used it as a coping mechanism because I was raised Lutheran and we went to church every Sunday, and I had a really strong faith in God, I thought at the time. But when that happened, I was like, how can God be doing this to our family? And so the way I coped with it was to go further into the drinking. And then by the time I was 16, he died. And I guess I couldn't really deal with it. My mom wasn't really there. Some families, when they go through a crisis like that, it pulls them together. And ours, it just tore everybody apart. So I started drinking a lot every weekend. And I would never drink just to have a drink. I would totally get wasted. I don't ever remember a time where I actually drank just to have a beer or whatever. It was always to get drunk. And it went from different types of alcohol. I started to smoke pot, and hash at the time was a big thing. And then I started taking, I don't know what they were called, but they were little pills that were like speed that the truckers used to take to keep themselves awake. And I'm not really sure what the chemical name of it was, but I started taking those because I found I could drink more if I took those pills. So that went on for quite a while. And my first husband and I, we were high school sweethearts, and we ended up getting married and moving down to Texas. And we kind of fed each other's addictions. We partied together. We drank. Every weekend, we would just get shit-faced. And that went on for many years. And I held down a full-time job and everything, It wasn't like it was causing any damage that I could see. But eventually, I got tired of the drinking, and I started working 2 jobs, and I had an affair. I didn't do anything with a guy except kiss him, but my husband found out about it, and so we split up. And then when that happened, I kind of went into an eating disorder where I wasn't eating because I was just a mess. I couldn't figure out my life and what my purpose was. And I felt bad about cheating on him, but I wasn't happy with him. And I didn't want to be in the drinking anymore. But then I started restricting food and started to get real skinny. And so I kind of went into anorexia a little bit. And then I went to fashion college in Dallas because I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And I kept getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And one of the teachers there did a lecture on eating disorders or something. And she said that a girl that was anorexic had gouged herself on all this food and it gave her a heart attack and she died. And so I thought, well, I'm going to try it because I really wanted to die. And,
oh, wow.
And that was my thinking at the time. I was just not really, I don't know why I would even think something stupid like that. But I mean, she said it worked for that girl. So I thought, well, it might work for me. But then it didn't work. And then I started becoming bulimic because I was like gorging all this food and then I didn't want to get fat. And so I started bulimia. And at the time I wasn't drinking and I wasn't doing any drugs. And I was just a big mess up there. It was in Dallas. And so I called my mom and I was like, can I come home? And this was around Christmas time. So I went home and I was so ashamed of myself. I didn't want to see any of my old friends from high school. This was a town I grew up in and I was really skinny, but I was practicing bulimia at the time. And I guess before I even went home, I was staying with these girls. And that was the first time I thought about buying a gun to shoot myself in the head because I was in so much pain. But I didn't do that. I called my mom, went back to Michigan. And then she called my husband. We were separated, but not divorced at the time. She called him. He was in Florida. She goes, Gloria needs your help. You need to come back up here and get her. So he came up from Florida. We decided to move back down to Texas. And so we came down to Texas, and I didn't know it. But at the time, when we had separated the first time, he had gotten into methamphetamine. And so when we came back to Texas, he moved to Florida to try to get away from his addiction.
Wow.
Yeah, the geographical cure.
Yep.
And then when we went back down to Texas, he got right back into it. And then I started using it because it made me feel good. I felt invincible. I could get a lot of stuff done. I didn't want to eat. I felt like it cured my eating disorder. Like at the time when we moved back to Texas, I gained a bunch of weight. And I really hated myself. I was so disgusted with myself and such low self-esteem. And so I started doing the methamphetamine with him. And of course, it starts out one day a week, maybe a Friday night. And then you're so worn out the next day from the downside of it that you're like, okay, well, let's go get another 8-ball. So it ended up being like every Friday and Saturday night. And then pretty soon it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. And then pretty soon it was like we're writing a check at the grocery store to cash to go get some drugs and covering a check with a check with a check. And we were both working full time. I ended up losing so much weight that I weighed like 85 pounds. And I was still working a full-time job. And I got so paranoid from the meth that I would, when my husband was at work, he worked sometimes on Saturdays, I would crawl around on the floor in our duplex because I thought people hated me so much that they were going to shoot through the windows and kill me. And I had no reason to think that other than the drugs had just messed up with my mind so much. And he had kind of talked to me about getting into treatment, but he was also using. So like I said, we fed each other's addictions. And we used to fight over who got the biggest line and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. I mean, it was just nuts. And I guess I first realized that I was in a lot of trouble when I was doing so much speed that I couldn't drink anymore. Like I used to be able to drink and do speed and I was fine. But then eventually I couldn't, like I drank one sip of beer and I almost passed out. And I wasn't eating. I would not eat. And everything I ate, I would throw up. Even if I drank a Diet Coke, I would try to throw it up. It was just nuts. So then I was still working this full-time job. And my boss and the woman who I worked in a small office, they did an intervention on me. And they said, you need to get help or you're not going to be able to come back to work. And all I could think about was, I got to work because I won't be able to afford my drugs. I wasn't really thinking about there's something wrong here with me. You know, I got to support my habit. So I agreed to go with them to a treatment center, which was a center for an eating disorder, because I don't think they knew at the time that I was addicted to meth, because I didn't do it at work, but I was just really, really skinny. And so they took me to the hospital here, St. David's Hospital, and they had an eating disorder program. And I was scared. There was a part of me that didn't want to go, but I was so desperate for help. There was a part of me that wanted to live and a part of me that wanted to die. And I was trying to move more towards the part of me that wanted to live. And so I said, yes, I'll go. So she took me up there, and I talked to this woman named Jana, who was head of the program there. And it was the first time I really admitted to anyone that I was bulimic. And they classified me as bulimic, anorexic because of my weight and all the behaviors. But she just hugged me and understood. And I felt, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. And she gave me hope. She gave me hope that I could really change my life and turn it around, because I didn't think I was going to live, really. I mean, I don't even think I really thought about dying. I think I just thought I'd never get out of that spiral.
Right.
So they had to run my insurance and all that. Luckily, I was working full time, and it totally covered the treatment, but I didn't go back for another 3 days. And of course, those 3 days I was like using like crazy, because I thought, well, this is my last chance, But
it's always the same. I got to get as much in there as I can.
I know, it's like nuts. But it shows you how strong the addiction is. So they admitted me, and they put me on the cardiac ward with the heart monitor and IVs in my arms when I got there, because I was so malnourished, and they were afraid my heart was going to stop. And I remember the first night I was in there, they had those IVs in my arms because they were giving me electrolytes. And I thought they were trying to poison me. So the paranoia was still there. And I tried to pull those things out of my arms. Oh. And they put me in a straitjacket and laid me in that bed. And they said, we're not taking this off of you until you promise that you're not going to do something foolish like that. I laid there for probably like a half a day with that straitjacket on. And then it was time for dinner. And they said, if you promise not to act out, we'll take you out of the jacket, and you can eat. And so I did that, and then from there it was just like one step at a time. After a week, they put me into the program with the other girls that were there for their eating disorder, and I was there for 6 weeks from therapy. And they took us to meetings. That was my introduction to the 12-step program. They took us to meetings, and it was a really good program. I remember one of the therapists there, one night I was going through DTs where you just shake uncontrollably. And she just held me. I was in the bathroom and I was on the floor, and she just held me, and I just cried and cried and cried. And I'll never forget her. Her name was Marion. I don't remember her last name, but I'll just never forget how she was there for me, when I was falling apart. We did some really good therapy there, art therapy, all kinds of stuff. And they taught us how to eat properly, which I think was really a blessing for me, because I think a lot of people don't get that when they're trying to fight their addiction, is how to nourish your body properly to get it back to health. So I was lucky in that sense that they put me in an eating disorder clinic, because they fed us regular meals. We had to meet with a nutritionist, and they give us a chart of, this is how many proteins you should eat a day, and how many carbs, and how much fat. And there were times when I would fight it if I'd eat beef or something. I was like, I can't eat that. And they would make me eat it, because it was part of our treatment that no food is bad. It's there to nourish your body. And we would pray before every meal. So anyway, it was a good experience for me. I also had therapy, and I had memories of being sexually abused by my father while I was in treatment, which was pretty heavy. It was kind of a shock. I had never remembered that before. I had no recollection of it prior to treatment, but I had pretty strong memories there, and I feel like it was because I was in a safe place, and I knew I was supported there.
So you'd blocked all that out?
Yeah, I blocked all that out.
Do you remember the age you were roughly when all that happened?
4 years old.
4 years old?
Yeah. Not like sex, but...
Fondling or...
Yeah. So I didn't have memories. I had 2 memories, one with my dad and one with a bunch of his friends, because he was in a group He was a farmer, and he was in a farm bureau group, and they would all get together once a month on a Saturday, and they'd always be drinking. And I remember them coming up into my room one time and molesting me. So those two memories I had. Now, I don't remember anymore, like if it went on for years or it just was a few times, and it was so odd to me because I always felt like I was closer to my dad than to my mom, you know? So it took a lot. And I actually asked my mom about it when I was in treatment. She came to see me, and the psychiatrist met with us, and she said, oh, she's just making that up. It's the drugs that are talking. It's not true. And she totally denied any of it. My insurance was running out, so I had to leave the treatment center, and they wanted me to go into a halfway house because my husband at the time was still living in Austin, and that's where I was. And so I was looking at 3 different places. There was one in Dallas, one in Austin, and one in Pennsylvania, a halfway house. And, you know, prayed about it and did some journaling on it. That's the other thing that really helped a lot was I was doing a lot of writing every day. We would do writing, journaling, all kinds of stuff like that. And I'd journal for many, many years. I still have all of that in boxes here in my house. And I decided to go to Pennsylvania because I didn't want to stay in Austin because I was afraid I would get too enmeshed with my ex-husband. And then Dallas, there was a snowstorm up there at the time, and I couldn't get through to them to work things out with the insurance and stuff. So that wasn't an option right away because of the snowstorm, and Pennsylvania was the one that was open right away. And so I just figured, well, God intends me to go to Pennsylvania. Well, in order to go into the halfway house, because it was a halfway house for chemical dependency, I had to go through a 30-day treatment for chemical dependency because they addressed my addiction in the eating disorder place, but it was mostly eating disorder. They took us to AA meetings and all that, but because it was, I guess, categorized as eating disorder, I had to go through the 30-day chemical dependency treatment. And that I did at this place called Chit Chat Farms in Virginia. And then from there, I did 30 days there. And then from there, I went into the halfway house in Pennsylvania. The halfway house is interesting because I felt pretty strong when I was there, like strong in my recovery. I was really dedicated to my recovery because I had almost died from it. And I was so grateful to be alive that I was just going to do everything I could to stay sober and clean and, you know, keep abstinent with my food. So like I was saying, in the eating disorder place, they told us all these things we could do to change our life, like go back to school, take an art class, or do other things. So on my own, from the halfway house, I would call the community college or try to scope out different things. Well, they didn't like that. They wanted to control everything about my life while I was there at the halfway house, which I understand now. But at the time, I was kind of like, I'm trying to improve my life. Why aren't you letting me improve my life? So one day we did therapy in the house, and we also did outpatient therapy. So one of the other girls and I drove into town to go to therapy. Well, I got out before she did, and she said she's going to be a while. So I go, well, I'll just take the bus home. Well, before I was on a contract because we had group therapy, and I think I started the therapy group before the therapist was there, you know, just to get people talking or something. Right. And they didn't like that either. So they put me on a contract. And one of the things on my contract was you can't go anywhere without anyone from the house or one of the staff members. And I didn't think about it really when I told that girl I would take the bus home. I was just thinking, well, I don't want to sit around here. I'll just take the bus home. It's no big deal. Well, at the corner at the bus stop, there's a little store there, and they had these really good muffins. So I went in to get a muffin, and when I was in the store buying the muffin, the bus came by, and I missed that bus. So I waited for the next one, and I got home on the bus. And when I got home, that other girl had gotten home before me. And so the house mother was all mad because they thought I was out trying to use or whatever, and I'd broke my contract. And so they kicked me out of the halfway house and sent me to the Salvation Army. I only stayed there for a couple of days because I was going to meetings in Pennsylvania. This is in Reading, Pennsylvania. And I was going to meetings there. So one of the women from OA, she said, you can stay with me for a while. And then eventually I got assistance from the city and got a place to rent. And I was on food stamps for a while. And then I worked like part-time jobs. But I was still dealing with a lot of the emotional Well, just being sober, and also from learning about the sexual abuse. Like if some old man looked at me weird, or some guy looked at me weird, or something, anything like that would just set me off, and I'd get all pissed. And so I walked out of one job because there was some old man there that was kind of hassling me, and I just walked out. And I was going to meetings and everything, but I was not very level-headed or emotionally, sober, so to speak. Eventually, I got kind of lonely up there because I felt like I made some new friends in treatment in Austin, and I decided to come back to Austin. And at the time I came back, then my ex-husband had moved back up to Michigan, where I'm from. So it was safe for me to come back as far as like getting enmeshed with him anymore. So I came back, stayed with a girl from treatment, and then I again got on assistance from the city. I lived in a place that I paid I think $60 a month, and then I was on food stamps for a while. And then eventually I got a job, and I decided I wanted to go back to school to get a degree. I went to community college first and got all my prerequisites, so to speak, the English and government and all that. And then I went back to the University of Texas. I got accepted there into their film program, and I studied radio, TV, and film with a major in film production. And so I went through college, did it all on my own. I never moved back with my mom because I was still dealing with all the memories of the sexual abuse. So I was doing therapy. I got into therapy groups and went to meetings religiously. That was my thing. I would go to school, do my homework, but I was working part-time, and I'd go to my meetings. Even on campus, they had meetings, so that was great.
How old were you when you went back to school?
Well, I got sober when I was 27, and so I was in my early 30s when I went back to school.
So it's never too late.
No, never too late. Yeah, I thought that too, but I was determined to, like I said, change my life.
Right.
They always told me you got to change people, places, and things when you get clean. You can't go back to the old habits and the old people in your life. They're going to drag you down into your addiction. And I guess I wanted to major in film because my goal, more or less, was to write a screenplay about my sexual abuse and make a story out of it. That I wanted to tell my story in some way that would benefit other people. I mean, that was the initial thing. I don't know if I've not done that. I don't know that it's that important right now. I guess at the time I was so angry about it that I just wanted to expose, get back and revenge and all that. And now I've done a lot of work through it, and I feel like I'm at a place of forgiveness and acceptance, more or less. Not that it's acceptable that somebody would do that to a young person, but it doesn't trigger me like it used to. It just used to piss me off like crazy about everything. So I went back to school, got my degree, and then I just started working in the video business, in television, because I didn't have a car at the time, and I lived near the campus, and I had a bike, and the closest internship was at the TV station, the NBC affiliate here in Austin, where I could ride my bike. And so I did the evening news there. I did camera and worked on the crew, and I worked with it was the creative services department where they did the advertising and stuff, and they started letting me take out the beta cams, which are these huge cameras. They don't, nowadays, everybody's got the digital, the light cameras. These are like big cameras, and they let me go out and shoot on our break, like the weather, they call it a bump, which is just like a video picture that they might display like coming up next or whatever. So I would do that, and the producer really liked some of the stuff that I was doing. So I really enjoyed that, the creative part of it. And so I worked in TV, took some odd jobs here and there, and worked full time for the state for a while doing video production, working in a studio. So I was directing, producing, editing, shooting camera, doing all that stuff. And then at the time, I also started getting into yoga. And I started out just kind of like one of my friends from therapy invited me to a class. I didn't really like the teacher that time. I guess I was looking for a community that didn't drink or smoke or do any of that. And one day I was on a video shoot. I worked for the Awesome Music Network, and we were shooting at this club down in town. And we were on a break, and this guy came up to me, started talking to me. I was divorced from my first husband. I was single, and this guy came talking to me. He was a guitarist, and he was playing at this. He goes, "I'm playing at a yoga party. Do you want to come?" I was like, yeah, yoga party. What are we going to do? Like sit around and chant or om, like with our legs crossed. I just thought it was funny. I had no idea. And I was like, all right, okay. He seems like a nice guy, and I'm single. I want to meet new people. So I went to the party, and it was a yoga teacher here in town that had a pretty big following. And he every year had a party for his yoga students. And I went to the party, and there was no alcohol, no drugs, no smoking, nothing. And I thought, wow, I found my tribe, outside of AA and all of that. And so I started going to his yoga classes and really fell into not just the physical aspect of the yoga, but also the spiritual and the healing that comes with it.
Yes.
So I started taking yoga classes with him and kind of getting in that community a little bit. And still going to my meetings and working. And I like the lifestyle. I was clean. I was doing all these creative things, with my work. I didn't have like a typical 8 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever schedule. And I was making decent money where I could support myself. So I was very happy. Well, I had another tragedy, which I guess was God just giving me another wake-up call. I had a lot of friends in program. And I went to this one meeting with a friend of mine, and he introduced me to this other guy who was in Al-Anon. And we hit it off and were really attracted to each other. And so we started dating each other. And the friend that introduced me was actually like jealous because he was interested in me as well. But I didn't know. And I wasn't really interested in him just as a friend. But it was that whole weird thing going on.
Right.
Well, I ended up getting involved with this guy, and he committed suicide. I spent the night at his house, and I woke up and found him. He had shot himself in the head, and he was still alive when I found him. The police think that the gunshot was what woke me up. And it was so surreal to me because I had no idea that he was manic depressive or that he was suicidal. I met him in the program. I thought, when I was with him, he was really up and happy, and it was like one of the funnest relationships I had. But yeah,
This is the guy from Al-Anon.
Yeah, he was in Al-Anon. And
how long were you seeing him?
Only like a couple of months, like 2 months, maybe 2 or 3 months. Not very long at all.
And never saw this coming?
No.
Oh, man.
And after the fact, that friend that introduced us, he was like, oh, yeah, he tried it a couple of times. And then this other friend of his who knew me, he said, oh, yeah, he tried it once. He drank antifreeze. And then one time he cut his wrists. And I'm like, why didn't anybody say anything? Because for one thing, I don't know that I would have got involved with him. And the other thing is I would have felt like, well, maybe I could have helped him in some way, or because I had no idea. So that happened, but I stayed sober through the whole thing. It didn't kick me into my addictions. I prayed a lot. I had really strong support, a couple of really strong spiritual women that were in my life at the time, and they helped me through it. And they kind of showed me the bigger picture of not like, oh, forget this happened, this is your lesson or whatever, but kind of like the saying, everything happens for a reason.
Yes.
And that it was God's way of making me maybe stop being so, not promiscuous, but being so a little careless with who I'm getting involved with and not really getting to know them before I just go all in. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
So, but also to understand that, sometimes the suffering is so deep that you don't see it on the outside. And there's a lot of people out there that are suffering that, don't show it. And I didn't have the tools to help him. I tried to be supportive when I was with him. I know that night he was upset about some other girl he used to date that was kind of rejecting him. And I was just like, you don't have to worry about her. I love you and care about you. You don't have to try to win her approval. But for some reason, he was just obsessed about gaining her approval or acceptance or whatever. But it was tough. But at the time, I feel like that also catapulted me further into my spiritual practices, my yoga, the prayer and meditation and my meetings. Actually, for a while, to be honest, it was hard to go back to the meetings, especially like the Al-Anon, because I just thought, oh, these people are all messed up, you know. I mean, I am too, but after that happened, I was just like, I don't trust anybody that I know from meetings. It was really challenging.
How much time did you have at that point?
Let's see, that was in 96. So I had close to, about, 87. So about
10 years?
Yeah, 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard. It was not an easy thing to go through by any means. I thought, well, shit, I've been through enough, haven't I? You know, I guess not. You know, yeah. I don't know. I'm not proud, but thankful that God has kept me on the path despite having gone through that. I'm sad that he chose to take his life because he was a really nice person and he was young. He was only 26.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
He was 26. I was, I think, 7 years older than he was. Yeah. I just wanted to add that I was working with a therapist. This was a couple of years after I got into recovery, and I was in a group therapy session, and I was dealing with a little bit of depression, and she wanted me to get on Prozac, and I just didn't want to take any drugs at all. You know, I just got off of drugs, so I didn't want to take anything. And so I started looking into alternative ways where I could boost my brain chemistry so that I wouldn't deal with the depression. And I found a woman, she was actually registered, a clinical nutritionist, but she was also starting her practice dealing with neurotransmitter support. So I went to see her and I got tested. I believe it's a saliva test that they do. And it tests your dopamine levels and your serotonin and GABA and I think norepinephrine, all the different neurotransmitters. So you know where you're out of balance. When you're using, especially like I was addicted to alcohol and methamphetamine primarily. And what that does is it raises, especially the stimulants, raise the dopamine or fill your brain with dopamine like 5 to 10 times higher than what's normal for your body. And so your brain gets used to that level and it compensates after a while. I think the receptors get less, they're not as receptive, I guess, you know, or there's less.
I think they lose their sensitivity.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's the word. So anyway, she did the test with me and then I got on some amino acids and I continue to take them. You know, I get retested. Like they want you to do it at least once a year. So I try to do that at least once a year just to see where my levels are at. But it's helped me tremendously just to deal with anxiety. Because sometimes if the levels are off, you can feel anxious or nervous, or then it could go the other way where you feel depressed or lethargic. And so anyway, I just wanted to add that in because it was an important piece for me, along with, you know, the meetings, the yoga, the nutritional aspect of it, and then doing that as well.
So if somebody wanted to find out, like right now, like if they were listening to us right now, and the first step you found this doctor, I'm assuming online?
No, she's here in Austin.
Okay.
And her company is called Neurogistics.
Okay.
And she has a website, and I would think that you could probably go through her website because they can send you the test and then, you know, she could do like a phone consultation with you after she gets the results.
Okay.
So that's just who I worked with. But, you know, if you would go online and there's all kinds of websites and even some treatment centers now are using amino acid therapy in their treatments. So, you know, if you Googled neurotransmitter support for addiction or something like that. There's a book that I also read, The Mood Cure by Julia Ross. And this has to do with diet and brain support. So that might be a good resource for people too. Yeah, neurogistics.com is Pam McAmel is the woman that I worked with. And I know the woman that I worked with, she works with a lot of children also that have been diagnosed with ADHD and all those kind of conditions and works on the same, you know, without drugs. You know, it's nutritional therapy and amino acids. So it's all natural and, you know, just what your body normally gets from food, but maybe you're not getting enough in your diet or or you just need a little extra help, like with the 5-HTP, which helps to boost your serotonin. So, yeah, like I said, it's been a real important piece for me because I just didn't want to get on Prozac. And nothing against people that do. Just for me personally, that was my choice, that I wanted to try to keep as clean, I guess, as possible. I'm not saying that at times there aren't medications that people need to take. That's just something that has helped me. Yeah, so after that, I just started getting really into yoga. I felt like the yoga was a healing practice for me because a lot of the trauma that we go through is held in our bodies, and the yoga and therapy would just help bring that out. And at the time, though, after that happened, I was like, I'm not dating anyone anymore. I've had it. Just to be single the rest of my life. That's it. Well,
that's realistic.
Yeah. So I guess, my current husband and I have been together for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
And I was seeing an acupuncturist at the time that also taught yoga out in a field here, like a donation-based class. And so I went to her yoga class one day, and he knew her because they were both massage therapists, and because he went away to go to physical therapy school, and they used to trade massages while he lived here. And then he came back to Austin, and he came to see her. You know, they were friends, they weren't involved, but he came to see her, and I was in the class, and that's how we met. And then when I met him, I feel like I've known this person like forever.
Yep.
Like I felt just immediately comfortable with him. Like I felt my heart just open, and I felt a little nervous around him. It was weird because I was not looking to get involved with anybody. I was like, I'm over it. And then he came along, and, it's been a real blessing to my life. We're both into yoga. So we started going to yoga class together, and he's very supportive of my recovery. And so it's been really, really good. So eventually I became a yoga teacher myself. And I didn't really have the courage to do the first training, but my husband was very supportive. He's like, you can do this. And I'm like, okay. And he went with me. And so that was good. And then from there, it just, went on. I mean, I did numerous trainings, and I've been teaching now for 15 years and just love it. And so my life today, it's really good. When I was in my addiction, I lived in a rundown duplex that was full of roaches, and it was a mess. And now I live in a beautiful, it's a modest home, but it's nice. And, I have a nice car, and I never thought I would have any of those. Not that the material things are that important, but I didn't think my life would turn around that much at the time where I would actually be able to live a comfortable life where I could actually be happy. And then I wanted to do more as far as like giving back. So I did Nikki's training, and I've started the Y12SR thing here in Austin. It's been a little slow getting going just because there's so much to do in Austin, and I got to try to find a time that's good with the traffic and all that. So I started on Thursday night. Now I moved it to Saturdays to get it more accessible to people so that they can come. So it's slowly building. So I'm very happy about that. I have a better relationship with my mom now because I've done a lot of forgiveness about that. I've done a lot of step work on it. I did a lot of therapy on it. I have a relationship with my dad's side of the family. I never told them about the abuse. Especially my grandparents, they're no longer with us, but I just thought, well, it would just hurt them too much. And what's the point? Like it says in the steps, so we make amends, or you don't make amends if it's going to hurt someone else, and I'm not going to tell them something that's going to hurt them when they're in their 90s. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like it's going to destroy them and their family. And, what's the point? There's no point. But that's it's what my journey's been. A lot of work, but it's worth it.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's so many touching aspects of it, very delicate. And it's such a blessing for me because hearing someone open up about very personal things in their lives and then sharing it with the rest of the world, that's how this thing works.
Yeah. I just feel like if you're open to share, it gives people the permission or the freedom to share their story too, so they don't have to hold in all that pain and the struggle, because we're all in this together, like yoga teaches, we are all one. I am in you and you are in me. And I truly believe that we're all souls here on earth making our way.
That's 100% true. And the yoga aspect is so huge that the last few interviews that I've had, there's been a lot of sexual abuse discussed more than I would have ever imagined when I started this project, when I first started the Share podcast. And again, it's stories of addiction and recovery, and a lot of it stems from that such an early age of abuse, and the alcohol and the drugs. It just helps you completely detach from all that pain, from all that suffering, and then just brings you a whole new set of pain and suffering that you never even would have imagined. Yeah. You know, it's almost like a compound effect of pain and dysfunction that you're just trying to fix dysfunction with more dysfunction until ultimately you just hit rock bottom. You have no choice but to surrender and to find recovery or die.
Right.
You know, that's
the practice of yoga and in the steps teaches us that one day at a time.
That's exactly all it is. Just one day at a time. We only have a daily reprieve. So whether it's 1 day, 1 year, or 27 years, we all just have that one daily reprieve. If we're not consistent and vigilant about working the program in our lives on a daily basis, then we're working backwards instead of working forwards.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, Gloria, we could be stuck on this for hours and hours.
Yeah,
you know?
I know.
The topic of gratitude is big. But let's start closing up. And okay. The way I like to close up is the section for the newcomers. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery, and you're going to respond with inspiring and insightful answers you can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
Perfect. So, number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
I would have to say that if I started relying on other people's opinions of me, codependency, I guess. If I get too enmeshed in other people's opinions or people that aren't healthy for me or something like this, I think that would be a biggest challenge. I feel like I need to surround yourself with people that support you in recovery and that are looking out for your best interest, your best self.
So social acceptability was what was keeping you from possibly getting clean in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, because my self-esteem was so low that I try to find that through other people, like have other people validate me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or, yeah. So I think that's a big thing.
I'm sure it's a big for all of us. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
And at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery, when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time developed the hope that you could recover?
You know, I thought about that question, and I guess the very first moment was when I went to the treatment center and was talking to Jana, who was the director there. And I feel like at that moment, even though I didn't really know about the 12 steps yet, I was at a place of surrender where I was willing to trust that whatever they had for me there in the treatment center was going to work for me. And then after I was introduced to the steps, we did a lot of journaling about our powerlessness over the addiction. And I feel like when I first started journaling about it, which would have been in those 6 weeks that I was in the treatment center, where I actually wrote down how I was powerless. And that's when it came to the realization, like, wow, I am really powerless, you know. I just really didn't think about it. I was just on such a train going one direction, you know, that I didn't really think about where it was headed. So I feel like that was probably the aha moment where I actually wrote it down and could see it on a piece of paper, kind of like looking in the mirror at yourself. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. And again, the reason why I asked this question is so many newcomers will not put pen to paper.
Yeah.
And that there is this magic that happens the minute you write things down. I
wrote every day. Like I said, I still have the journals in a box. And I do write now, not every day because I have a really busy schedule, but I do still write, especially if something's really bothering me. I'll just write it out because it just helps you process, kind of look at what's really going on. Because a lot of times you can be on the surface of the emotion and not really know what's going on deep down inside.
Yes. The moment I started writing it down and reading it back to myself, it changed.
And then sharing it, you know, with your sponsor is also very important.
They always say that the only wrong way to work the steps is alone.
Yeah.
So you write it, then you share it with your sponsor, and that's how the magic happens. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So in early recovery, is there a favorite book that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, definitely the 12 and 12 and the big book. I always like those books. But there is also these little affirmation books that I used to read from like Hazelden, and Each Day a New Beginning. It's, there it is.
Got it. Each Day a New Beginning.
Yeah. It's a Hazelden series, meditation series. I like to read them like when I first get up in the morning. Just put your mind in a positive mindset, to set your day after your prayers. And yeah, I really like those. But definitely the 12 and 12. And there was a Codependent No More book that I always liked. And I'm not sure who the author is. I want to say Melody Beattie, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
Don't worry, I'll look it up.
Yeah, Codependent No More. That's a good book too.
Perfect.
One more that I am currently reading, or is that another question?
Nope. Go ahead.
Okay. So Tommy Rosen does this Recovery 2.0 conference every year. It's a free online thing.
Uh-huh.
And he had this speaker on there named Robert Holden, who is I guess he's a psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever. And he wrote this book called Shift Happens. And that's I know.
I love it.
It's a really good book. They're short chapters, but it's very profound reading. And I just love that book. I use it. I read some of it in my yoga classes, and a lot of people just really like what he has to say.
Well, I just Googled Codependent No More, and it's Melody Beattie.
Yeah, I was right.
Yay. Number 4, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
Well, they used to tell me in the meetings, put as much energy into your recovery as you did into your addiction. That always kind of stuck with me because, I'm a pretty driven person as far as like type A personality, I guess.
Yep.
I did my addiction to probably the extreme there. That phrase always stuck with me to channel that energy in a different direction and use as much energy as you did to get your substance of choice, whatever, and turn that around. Then I also had an affirmation when I was in treatment that I really liked. It was absolutely nothing and no one stands in my way of recovering. And I used to say that to myself all the time, especially when I was like doubting or feeling hopeless or you can't do this anymore, or something's frustrating me or I want to use or whatever. Besides calling people and using the steps and all of that, just that little affirmation really helped me a lot.
I'm going to change my question here. I'm going to start asking, what is the best suggestion or affirmation you have ever received? I love that affirmation. Wonderful, wonderful. And if you could give, it might be the same one. If you could give our listeners only one suggestion, what would it be?
I would just say never give up, that you're worth it, and just reach out and just take it a step at a time. But mostly that you're worth it and you have a divine purpose here on earth in this life that you've been given, and don't give up.
I love it. Man, I love it. That's beautiful. That's what we got to do here. All right. Now, I also wanted to ask you about your Y12SR class that you give on Saturdays. Tell us about that one, where it's located, the time, and that way I can put that in the show notes.
It's at the Unity Church in South Austin. I believe the address is 5501 West Highway 290. And it starts at 9:30 it's the last Saturday of every month. So it was this weekend for the month of August. Goes from 9:30 to 10:45, and basically we start out with a meeting and sharing, and it's a 12-step based meeting, so it's half meeting and then half a yoga class. And usually I have a theme picked out, like it may be surrender or forgiveness, or I have a theme, but if something comes up in the sharing that we can work through with the yoga practice, then I can weave that in as well. So that's kind of how it's structured. Yeah, it's at the Unity Church, and just show up. It's open to anyone in 12-step program or, anyone dealing with addiction or a loved one that has an addiction. It's for everyone.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Great suggestions, Gloria. We have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida. Oh.
That was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not promote or endorse any 12-Step Anonymous program.